which I came across, which happened to be, for the most part, British officers, British soldiers, their families, and any resemblance of British in the preceding areas. Unfortunately, because this was such violent and sudden, not backed by political tensions or politicians or other countries, this was a very unorganized rebellion, which actually lasted for about a year of continuous fighting, of the British trying to get troops over to India, which was very difficult at the time, considering the Suez wasn't open yet. They had to go, the world had to get back to Britain around Africa. Soldiers had to be drafted and sent back to India all the way around Africa in order to try quell this rebellion of, oh, drilled to British standard sepoy soldiers who were armed with heavy weaponry, the newest rifles the British could get, well, for the most part. And it was essentially a bloodbath for around a year, which, from my memory, took around 800,000 other casualties or deaths. I remember that number stuck in my head, which is, for a rebellion which wasn't organized, it's rather incredible. Unfortunately, due to the fact that it was so sudden, and because, as I mentioned previously, India was such a divided place, not all the provinces decided to rebel, as some provinces believed they had better treatment from the British than others. It might have been on religious grounds. Whilst others were still controlled by warlords who were paid off by the British to stay neutral. So actually, a very small amount of Indian provinces actually joined in the rebellion to try and overthrow the British governance. Oh, the British governance, the East India Company. Following this, the British decided to increase their presence in India. They managed to do this because the Industrial Revolution had come around a few years earlier, so they could mass produce more weapons, more heavy weaponry. Steamships actually became a really important thing to bombarding ports, who the Sepoys thought would be a vital place to begin trade as an independent India, until the steamships rolled around and said no. Following this, in 58, I said this rebellion lasted a year, which is an incredible feat, considering Britain was at the time the biggest power. I can say this pretty freely, was the biggest power anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
The sun never set on the British Empire, especially on the jewel of the crown. So after Britain had managed to actually get troops through to India and just outgun the already struggling sepoys, the British government decided to actually take direct control over India, because up until this point, the East India Company had been running its thing and controlling it through trade. So in 58, the British government, I thought it'd be different, government came in and decided to make India its own, there's a word for this, I want to say colony, but there is a different word for this.
I'm thinking about it now as well. I don't remember exactly what it was called.
Essentially take direct control.
Is
Protectorate?
wasn't
No.
it crown dependency or something along those
That's the
lines?
one. Make it a crown dependency. Because India was, in fact, a massive source of income for the British. If there was ever a second mutiny, there was a chance that they could win there, and Britain would lose an extreme amount of manpower, spices. Generally, India is a massive place. It is a massive source of income for trade for Britain all around the world, especially since it is essentially a stepping stone to China, which Britain used a few years on, continuously throughout history with India, to trade with China. Considering China is so far away from Britain, it wasn't actually a feasible thing for ships to travel there. But if they stopped in India, which was a safe place for British ships, considering British owned it, essentially, not owned it, ran it, the British decided to take control, and Queen Victoria became the Empress of India for the first time in 1858, that is. Which is a funny thing, considering a company essentially ran India for a few hundred years, I want to say.
I don't think it was a few hundred years because
I remember. Sorry.
I know Portuguese explorers reached India and purchased or they acquired ports from the Indians forcefully in about the 1500s, if I'm correct, because that was during the Age of Exploration where all of the European powers were just getting all their hands on everything they could get. And I know that Britain was a bit slower on that front because Portugal and Spain were leading the colonization effort. But I do know that Britain did have some missions, and I don't remember what. I know they also purchased the port or acquired the port, but I don't remember which it was the first one. Because I know, I don't remember the Portuguese one either, but I know Portugal was the first European country to acquire a base in India. But I do not remember exactly the details about it. We have some comments on Facebook that might enlighten us. Let's have a look. So we have Avinash saying that. So we see. Yes, Mango Pandy did the mutiny. The myth was that the cow meat was used. Oh, I've already read this.
Yeah.
Let me see.
I don't worry, I have.
Yeah, go on.
Yes, after that revolution spread over India. Yes, there were ICS officers as well. They sent Bahadur Shah Zafar to Rangoon. They came here to trade and did the reign for around 220 years. So I think that answers the question.
I think is that overall then? Because if we 1850 to it must be overall because 1850 to Indian independence, which was 47, I think.
Quick Wikipedia. The East India Company was first began in India in 1612 when they docked and created factories. But I don't think that's when they became the major, or essentially I don't want to say superpower in India.
No.
Backed by the British government.
Portugal had a much bigger leading role at the beginning, but I'm guessing as the 1700s rolled around, Britain started to expand a bit more and take over control of India when they saw the amount of resources. And I know after the Industrial Revolution, they took advantage of this new technology of the steam train because a lot of British people, a lot of nationalist British people go around and say, our rule over India wasn't that bad. We gave them technology, we gave them steam trains, we gave them etc. But there's a lot of arguments against that. One, there was Indian steam trains that were developing, which were actually better quality than the ones that the British were. Well, rather better quality, cheaper to produce, and much more up to the standard that the Indians had at the time. But the British forced the Indians to use their trains and allowed them to build their railways rather than allowing the Indians to do it, to kind of just expand their control of the country. And rather than these rail lines be used for the benefit of the people of the country, to move them around, to spread resources across the subcontinent, they were mostly used to extract resources. So most of the railways built before the 20th century rolled around, all of them led to a port, which allowed the British Empire to collect the resources from far into the inland of India and transport it very rapidly to the coast, where the very expansive Royal Navy could just transport it back to Britain, where all of the new spices, silks, and other new luxuries could be enjoyed by the aristocracy and even the growing middle class that came about as a result of the Industrial Revolution.
But do you think that, let's say, the Indians, without the help of the British Empire, would have been able to build these railroads by themselves as efficiently and at such a cheap cost?
I think
such a cheap cost because obviously it comes at a cheaper cost when you actually have the technology.
I think if we look at other examples of countries which
it's in a way, just like, I don't want to give the example of other communist states from the Cold War. It's when you have the resources, you have the labor power, you have everything in front of you, but you just don't know how to put them all together. That's kind of the thing what they did.
Yeah, but the thing is, India knew how to put it together because when the steam trains first came about in India and they first started to get built to help the British get the resources out. There were Indian engineers and Indian again, we're using the term Indian as a very expansive word here, because obviously there's a lot of different ethnicities within India. But there was a lot of people within the subcontinent who were willing to put their own work into developing systems that would be their own. So, like the previous example that I gave, I know that there was a engineer who patented a train prototype, which was on par, or I don't remember if it was basically on par to the steam engines that the British were providing to the country. And obviously this, from what I remember, this man was influenced by British education, and as such was able to reach this understanding of this technology and then reproduce it himself. But I think that would have if India wasn't taken over by the British, this could have still happened, because there were in the example of Russia, there was many Russian engineers where at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in Britain who came to study in Britain and picked up the technology and then took it back to Russia, and that's how. Although there wasn't a very expansive train line in Russia, because Russia didn't really industrialize until the communist times, they still brought the technology over through this educational basis. It still wasn't fully implemented because it was only one person, but the technology would still appear in the subcontinent.
I'm not saying that they wouldn't have done it. They would have done it eventually. But the thing is, time was very important, because at the time, like you said, spices, silk, those kind of materials and, let's say, luxuries that you would find within the regions of India and you couldn't find elsewhere in Europe or in the Western world, they were very important at the time because they were very expensive, because of the not only the demand that was created in the Western regions of the world, but also that you couldn't find them elsewhere. So by that time, if they wouldn't have rushed to get these railroads built to the main port so they can be exported to different nations, then I would assume that the Western world would have found various different ways to actually make or to procure such materials, I would say.
There's no location except for the Southeast Asia, where spices as such are really abundant. But except for that, region of the world, there is no other place on the planet where these spices and silks and like this are in such abundance. So at some point, the West would have come to India for these resources, even if they didn't take it over. But they would have been in a hot contest between India providing them and the colonized Southeast Asia providing them the same resource.
So just another war. If it weren't for the British first.
We have some more comments on Facebook before we move on to that. Also, the wood for making railway lines was taken from here, and the Kohinoor diamond as well. I know, if it hasn't already been uploaded, there is an article upcoming very soon about the. I'm not exactly sure how you say the Kohinoor diamond, the one that is on the crown of the British crown.
It has been published and it's going to be shared tomorrow.
Yeah,
for those
so we are going to share it on our Facebook page if you'd like to go to history.com.
There's a certain schedule. That's why it takes, even though the article is published. Like I said, if you want to get the articles as soon as they are published, please do make a Medium account and follow us on our History of Yesterday Medium page. Links can be found in the description
of this, and we also have links to everything on our Facebook page. If you are following us on Facebook, facebook.com/History of Yesterday publication, you'll find all of our articles there anyway. So if you are interested in that and want to read more into the topic, Avinash says yes, I will read that as well. Yeah, it's a very interesting piece. The writer really delved into the history of the diamond, and it's a really good way to look at India. That such a it's the world's biggest diamond, and this diamond was part of the Mughal throne back in the times that the Mughal Empire took over, and it kind of just tells the story of India, because it's as this diamond was passed around the different empires that took over the very rich subcontinent. So were the Indian people passed around between empire and empire up until the independence in 1947, or 15th of August 1947, as Avinash has put on Facebook. it really kind of shows the struggle, and I think we should continue on with what Oscar was saying about after Queen Victoria took over, because it really gives it the British side of the Indian struggle for independence for up until the Second World War. So Oscar, if you'd like to continue.
Yeah, so once the British Empire decided that they did not wish to even dare have an opportunity for another mutiny, another rebellion, they decided to take direct control, and the company was dissolved in 58, directly a year after, once it finished, once concluded. And the British Empire decided that they will clamp down on its army, because the Empire couldn't afford to just fire all the sepoy soldiers. It could only afford to punish those who had direct involvement in the mutiny, who they could prove to have actually taken part of it. But they did take some measures to try and reduce the risk, such as reducing the ratio. As I said before, it was around 1 to 8. Sometimes, probably in some brigades, 1 to 10, probably even larger. It was just 1 British officer, 1 soldier to 10 or more Indian soldiers. They reduced that by about half, where it was nearer to 1 to 3, 1 to 2, and the soldiers were very rarely trusted with things such as heavy weaponry. Artillery was now solely a British weapon, which only a British soldier was trained to use, or even given any sort of access to. So, following this, as I said, the British continued trying to establish their European influence over the continent, and basically start advertising to the British public that India was a place where they should go. Or previously, prior to the mutiny, India was kind of there. No, very rarely did people asked in a British street know what India was. Whilst post 57, 58, the British government started trying, I won't even say propaganda, so just deploying advertising campaigns to try get British people or people from generally from the colonies to go to India, just to establish a bigger foothold there. They would create massive parades. I've forgotten the exact word for this, but have you ever seen in Aladdin, where they have those massive elephants, a massive show where they have trumpets? Yeah, the British did that in real
Oh.
life, parading through streets in India, just trying to basically show we are the big boys now. Because now it's no longer the East India Company who are just trying to make some money. Now it's the British Empire trying to establish themselves as the rulers of this nation. They also started trying to crack down on warlords and princes. Once again, as I said, try not to make this India, try to make this ours, as one big chunk of just India, no longer such a diverse country. They just wanted to look at it, point on a map, and say, this is one thing. And they treat it as such. As I said, I don't believe they did anything as radical as try to ban traditions such as Sati? Sati, it was Sati, that's the one.
Yeah.
I don't think they went as far as that, but the officers did try to still. Where am I going with this? I'm bringing up officers now of the British Army.
We do actually have a point about officers. We have a comment from Facebook again. Avinash has said that we should cover something called the Peshawar incident. I don't know if you know anything about that, Oscar. But
I'll quickly Google it.
and according to I tried googling it myself, it doesn't seem to come up. The only thing that comes up when you Google it is a incident from 2014, and I'm sure that's not what Avinash is talking about. But according to him, Vik Kashandra Singh Kawali refused to fire on his own people in Gowari Rifles Regiment. It's not something that I can really look into because I've just tried to. So I'm just gonna take this at face value and use a bit of my own knowledge that there were regimental leaders such as what I'm guessing that Avinash is talking about from Facebook that led troops, or specifically just Wait. So Avinash has said that, sir, please search the Peshawar incident of Veer Kashan. Okay. I will have a look at this now.
Yep, I've
Um,
googled it.
Oh, Vikashandra Singh Karwali was the head of a platoon of the Royal Gawar Rifles. So obviously, Royal Gawar Rifles, or I hope I'm saying that right. These were regimental. This was a regiment that created by the British Army, but this is 1930, so we are jumping a little bit ahead.
This
So
jumped really
if
far.
Avinash, we will cover that in a minute. I'll have a look into it myself for Oscar, because we're like 1860 now, as India has become a crown colony. If we can look into, I'll look into that myself while Oscar continues to talk about. I think we were talking about the British kind of doing a show of force across India using elephants as such to
Portray power.
to portray power.
Yeah, I forget the exact term, but I'm going to use the phrase parades. And these would be painted, they'd be photographed, and these images of these displays of wealth and power, because this would literally be tens of thousands of soldiers, of elephants, of literally just boxes of money at this point, just being paraded down streets to show the British Empire is amazing. Why would you rebel against this? We have no problems with you. You have no problems with us. However, we could bring up. Oh no, this is the wrong page. I wanted to bring up the Suez.
Yeah.
Which was, I want to say, not a turning point. It was. Sorry for the stagnation. I've got the wrong web pages up right now.
If you want me to talk a little bit about it, from my understanding, I don't know how to spell jewel. In Britain's, I'm trying to change the topic.
Okay, I found it. The Suez was actually completed in '59. So these are literally year on year going through. The Suez would prove to be a vital stepping stone for the British being able to get a complete hold over India in this time period, as now the trade between India and Britain, tourism, or any ship, any use for a ship you can think of, to ignore Africa, ignore the months of having to swim around Africa and just cut through the Suez, made it a much more
Lucrative.
Much more lucrative, that's the word. Lucrative target. Much more lucrative place to be, to travel from Britain to one of the biggest colonies. As I said, and through the advertising, through the propaganda, through everything the British government could throw at its citizens, they started going to India to go see. And stories of people going there and making massive profits off this new land, as we said, through silk and spices, as I said, even jewels, or generally just the culture, made India much more important to the government than it ever could have been. And a few years on, the British government decided to take control of the Suez through a major stake. Basically, they bought major shares in the canal, and this upset many people. But the British government deemed this as a necessary risk in order to secure, even if we could say, its response time to any issues within India.
We have a comment on Twitch that actually kind of ties it together quite well. So Sonic Controller said the British Empire kept the reign by power, sometimes by the attacks, as we have discovered before when we talked about the rebellion. He also says India was the center of the trade route, so England couldn't accept to lose the land. And the creation of the Suez really focused the center of trade for the British Empire much more in India, because now that India could be accessed much easier, trade from China, which is China was a very big trading partner for Britain in the later stages of the 1800s. it allowed Britain to connect themselves to such a big trading partner much easier, because they had this big force that they owned so close to them, which allowed them to both make the journey from China to Britain without as much of a cost and without being as dangerous, but also it allowed them to project their power due to having such proximity. Sun Control also says that the British Empire was 44 million kilometers, however, the Mughal Empire was 88 million kilometers. I'm guessing that you speak about the size of the Mongol Empire at its highest, or if you're talking about the Mughal Empire, I'm not sure if you'd like to clarify that. But
I would also like to go and finish. I would like to add something after.
So I was basically finished. What I was kind of wrapping it up saying is that even though India, before the creation of the Suez Canal, India was just a very profitable region for Britain. After the creation of the Suez Canal, India became, as Oscar put before the podcast, as Oscar put it before the podcast, it kind of became the crown jewel of the empire, because it kind of just tied everything together. Not only was it a very rich region, which was which created large profits for the empire, but it also helped it both militarily through the having a large access to manpower, and through having connections to the rest of the world, as India was very central to a very trade-rich region of the world, especially at a time where China was trying to modernize, and having access to Western goods, which were being traded into China, was very paramount to them.
India was essentially Britain's way into Asia.
Yeah.
Like I said, even when the Suez wasn't there, India was the place where ships could go, be safe, offload their goods, grab goods, and go back to Britain. And the British would proceed to use this with their trade with China. They would use it as a stepping stone, because going to China was an extreme trek for ships at the time, which for the most part were still sail ships. Britain only started using their steamships for war. When they first discovered they could actually make things such as ironclads. Of course, they're going to be used for war. They're going to be used to humiliate other nations and establish their dominance. They're not going to be used for trade. So these were just massive galleons trying to, for months at a time, make it safely, for the most part, avoid outside intervention and make it to India, to then proceed to trade. And Britain would try to continue this by trying to get into China with things such as the opioids,
Yeah.
which turned into a massive source of income for Britain. And they would further proceed to, pretty sure some historians would refer to China as an informal state of Britain after the British essentially took control of the economy through things such as the opioid war, through winning the opioid war and managing to, some historians would say, drug China.
Yeah. We have a comment from Facebook. Avinash wants to ask you, Oscar, specifically, about your study of Indian history and the degree you have gotten. I mean, it's not really a degree in that sense, but you can explain it yourself if you'd like.
I studied the British Empire for my A-levels. I just did a history degree in my A-levels, and it just so happened that the British Empire and India were really intertwined. India was essentially a massive part of why the empire became the massive powerhouse that it did. The resources, the manpower, the economy that it could bring. That was really interesting to learn about, because until my studies began in that region, I had no idea that it was such an instrumental part, considering we were all born after, say, the empire fell. Of course, my teacher was old enough to actually witness the British Empire leave India in, I'm pretty sure was
47.
47, that's
yeah.
the one. I went
47.
57, that's wrong. Yeah, he was a really old guy. And he would actually speak about, he was very young, of course, but he still remembered and had pictures and things such as that of empire propaganda. Yeah, so I don't have a degree in actual Indian history. I have a degree in history in British Empire.
Yeah. to move on to that, we Silent Control is further put on the point that the Suez Canal was built by France. I think it was a combination of a French engineer with Egyptian manpower that managed to create the Suez Canal. But when England took over Egypt, India's location became more important. Yeah, the British control of the Suez Canal was vital to to Britain exploiting India as much as it did. And we have another comment saying, "What about the Silk Road? Was it considered obsolete at that point in time?" Since sail power became such wildly used across Europe specifically, doing such a big trek as it was done back when the Silk Road was used, it wasn't feasible because it took. Let's say you wanted to take British weaponry from Britain, because that was Britain's main export at the time. Britain sold off weaponry to India, to Africa for resources, to the whole world, because they were the most advanced in terms of weaponry at the time. If you wanted to take a crate of weapons from Britain and walk it all the way to, let's say, China, because China wanted weapons and they gave back porcelain and other such commodities and tea in return. It would have taken several months to, maybe perhaps even a year, to take a caravan with those supplies all the way to China and then back probably another 6 months a year.
It's not just that, just like Koska mentioned, it's also about the safety, because you can imagine that there were a lot of bandits on the Silk Road. So especially with weaponry, it wouldn't just take a lot of time, but you will also need a lot of people and defense, a lot of safety to actually transport weaponry.
It's terribly expensive as compared to taking
Exactly.
After ship technology evolved and it allowed empires like Britain, France, Portugal to explore the deeper, more dangerous parts of the seas, it also allowed them to evolve in terms of trade, because now you didn't have to walk all the way to China to give them weapons and then walk the porcelain all the way back to use it. Now you just put all the weapons on a ship, went around Africa and then towards India, where you could restock because you had control, and then you could have gone to China in about 2 months, give or take.
And we should specify that you would take the weapons on a warship.
Yeah, obviously you would have a convoy of merchant ships, and if it's such an important cargo, such as weapons, you would have warships escorting you all the way to India to avoid any confrontation with pirates.
No, but I said this because, just like Oscar mentioned, it took some time until the British Empire and until the Navy actually revolutionized to create big ships, just for transportation purposes.
Yeah. And then to go on to specifically this part of the history, the later 1800s, with the creation of steamships and ironclads, not only could you transport more, but you could transport more quicker. Sorry, because steam power you didn't need the wind to be in your favor to travel, because obviously ships at the time traveled with sails, and traveling with sails wasn't always effective, because sometimes the wind isn't in your favor and you have to drop the sails, and then you have to sail based on the current and the waves. Or if the wind is behind you and is pushing you, you'd maybe arrive a bit earlier. With the creation of steam power, this became a much more consistent and faster way to transport things, which we even see today. We use trucks to move goods around the country because they're over smaller distances. But if we want to move large amount of goods, we use really big transport ships that carry millions of tons of goods to travel large distances. And then once they get to a port, from there on, they either transport by train, which is another method of transport developed around this time, or we use trucks or things like this. Water has, since the development of sailing, has always been the easiest way to transport goods, especially during to give an example, the time of the Roman Empire. It was very important that the Romans had access to the sea, because they could supply things around the empire much faster. It would have taken months to travel from London to Alexandria, but with a ship, it would have taken a month. It allowed a relatively large empire for its time to keep control for a surprising amount of time. Yeah. We have some more comments on Facebook to address, I think. Yes, sir, that's a good point. Indian people died in the World Wars for Britain. We should start moving a bit towards the latter stages or the beginning of the 20th century, because I think we've been over the British control of India.
I'll just quickly throw in a quick little number from what I've found. Before the Suez was built, the trek all the way around Africa would take around 4 to 6 months. So that's why you can imagine it took so long for things such as a rebellion to get a reaction, as it would take about 4 to 6 months to go to Britain to tell them what's going on and then mobilize the troops and send them back. Once the Suez was built and Britain could actually access it, this was reduced to around 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So the trade, you can imagine how ships with literally a fifth of the travel time could shift way more troops, weapons, or spice, or steam trains, or literally anything. Yeah, I brought it with you if we literally moved on.
I mean, India played a big role for Britain in both world wars. If we'd like to have a look at that, because I think we should have a look at World War One first, because I want to. It's a little segue into what Avinash was saying on Facebook about the commander who refused to fire upon civilians. It's a quick explanation, but I'd like to have a little talk about World War One first, if you have a bit of knowledge on that.
So from my, unfortunately, minimal understanding of India during the First World War, the soldiers in the British Army in India weren't really given a choice. When they were initially signed up for the role, they were told they wouldn't have to fight in a country over the sea, over any body of water. As sorry, I can't remember whether this was religious or whether it was societal. They wished to fight on their own ground. So when the British said, no, you go Europe, of course the Indians weren't that pleased to fight against a country which they had usually never actually really heard of. If you think at the time of the average Indian soldier, I'm using Indian as a very broad term, sorry, getting sent to Germany to fight on the side of the British, they didn't know what they were doing. They were just getting sent essentially for a slaughter, and they were treated as such, presumably from the records which I've read, where they were just thrown against. Oh, we know what happened to the British. Imagine what happened to foreign soldiers.
Yeah.
Getting sent against the the German machine guns at the time.
I mean, I'd say that kind of applies to a lot of soldiers, but this is especially true of Indian soldiers, because the British didn't really invest in education within India during their stay over there. It kind of got a bit better after the First World War, because obviously this was the Indian people kind of doing a very big favor for Britain for fighting on their side. Although even though Britain had a quite strong hold on the on India at the time, it wasn't something normal to get volunteers from this country that, as Oscar said, probably didn't know anything about Europe or even about Germany or the geopolitical circumstances that led to them being sent over. It was something that kind of kickstarted the independence movement in the 20th century. But as he said, a lot of soldiers at the time that were taken from abroad, such as even the soldiers from the Americas, such as Canadian soldiers that were part of the Empire, many of them were probably not aware and didn't have the educational level to reach an understanding of what they were going in for. For them, they were just it was either going into the army or working in a factory for however many hours a day, depending on the working conditions of the factory they were hired at. And for many people, joining the army was a preferential treatment, was a preferential option. But they didn't really expect, because not many outsiders expected World War One to happen. a lot of people who were analyzing the political state of Europe did expect it, but a lot of people with that didn't have that same educational level kind of joined up into the army, thinking of, oh, this is just kind of an easy way to get out of not working. It obviously
I'll
being
stand and I'll just defend it.
yeah,
I will.
being part of the army is obviously hard. It's no easy job, but it's for some people the enticement of adventure, which the British Empire kind of used as a leverage, because many people signed up to the British Army, especially British citizens signed up to the British Army due to the fact that they would be sent across the world and they could see the great glory of the British Empire, because they'd have to be sent over to India to guard the port, to South America to help with a merchant ship, or so on and so forth. But Indian soldiers didn't really have that same level. Indian soldiers were hired as just general manpower for such an event as this happened, and not only were as kind of expected, because racial insensitive wasn't really in place at the time. Many people part of the British Army, even though they were fighting with Indians, didn't really see them as their equal. They kind of just saw the Indian people as you have said, like food for the slaughter. They would Indian soldiers would be sent in first. They didn't really get a priority within the war, and that obviously kickstarted the independence movement, as India saw that they were sacrificing so much, and they were asking the British Empire, but what are we getting back for this? We've sent over so many men to France to
A million.
a million.
Men.
So
Million men.
that was much. I'm pretty sure that's much more than the English. I don't remember the exact number of English soldiers that fought in the war, but
I'm not sure, but a million men.
yeah,
who,
it's
most of them, as we said, they didn't know what they were fighting. They were just getting sent, having signed up to.
I think it was the. Sorry for interrupting you. I think it also was the psychological thinking that, they've been seeing the British Empire in the country for so many years now, and they've been thinking, they got kind of thinking that they are the main power of the world, so it's going to be an easy job. We go there and we just like reinforce the whole situation, but they didn't know actually what kind of war the First World War, the Great War was, and how fierce the Germans were.
We have a comment from Avinash on Facebook again. There is something notable. Gabbar Singh got a Victorious Cross for valor and bravery in World War One.
That's incredible.
Yeah, a lot of Indians fought very bravely for the British Empire, even though it wasn't really their place. It wasn't their war to fight in. They were just kind of ripped away from their country and put into this scenario. But never mind such scenario, they still fought bravely, and fought maybe even braver than some of the other Dominion soldiers, including British citizens themselves. But it's not something that we really attribute. Especially a lot of people in the West, they see World War One as something that the West won. So for an American, they'd see both World War One and World War Two being won by the Americans, even though in both wars their impact is debatable. For a British citizen, they see World War One and World War Two as, well, mostly World War One as a more purely British victory, and World War Two as a kind of a cooperation. But World War One was seen as a victory that Britain kind of engineered, as France was on the back foot for most of the war, so their military wasn't to the level where they themselves could combat the Germans, and the Americans obviously did help in terms of industry and some manpower, but Britain poured a lot of resources into the war to make sure that Germany didn't expand. So, and from a French perspective, obviously the French would see that although they had some military downfalls, they still fought very bravely. But we never have a look at the outside help that each perpetrator of this war got. So in terms of the United Kingdom, obviously a million Indian soldiers, and I'm going to take a wild guess saying that many more from other dominions came to Britain, and fought. I know there was specific air squadrons from Canada and from other countries. Yeah, from New Zealand, Australia, who did partake in this, and many of them fought very bravely, as we have said. He hailed from Uttarakhand, a northern state in India. I'm guessing that is talking about Gabbar Singh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything more about World War One, Oscar? If you would like
I'd
to wrap it up.
mention a little part of history which I never actually heard about until I looked into this for this podcast. Have you ever heard of the Amritsar massacre?
No.
Amritsar massacre, which following the First World War and the soldiers coming back, after the million that was sent, give or take around 60,000 have been killed. This is not mentioning the casualties, the trauma, and we say 60,000 as if it's a small number of the million, but probably hundreds of thousands were injured. I don't recall the right numbers right now. But essentially, there was opposition within India to rebel against Britain following the war. There had always been. But the British were really afraid that India would try something following directly after the war. And in 1919, they arrested an Indian nationalist leader in the Sikh city of Amritsar. And this caused riots in the streets by the Indian people who were outraged by how dare the British try to control our politics, which they've been doing for many years. And the public gatherings, the Park riots, shops were destroyed, people were attacked, many Europeans were actually killed in these riots, as how dare the British try to control this. And a British Army general decided to ban public gatherings. Despite this, people still gathered in, I'm going to butcher this name, but it was a city within walls called Jallianwala Bagh, sacred to Sikhs. And the army started to intervene within this, frankly, rather peaceful protest as compared to the riots which had come previously. And around 90 Gurkha and Indian soldiers walked into the enclosed space and proceeded to fire into the crowd. This was a British show of power. So around 15 minutes, the British soldiers, quite frankly, fired into a crowd of civilians who were trying to scramble away, but they couldn't because this was a very confined space. And according to some statistics, around 380 people were killed and 1,200 were wounded by the gunfire, which didn't help the British cause, as it only outraged people more. Like we remember previously, one man being executed caused a whole rebellion which lasted for a year. Imagine how this, when spread around, well, at the time, information was becoming much easier to come by. So there's telegraph, newspapers, they're becoming much more commonplace everywhere in the world as information could travel quicker. It didn't really help. And it would only fuel the fire which would accumulate in 47 when India decided to finally have enough. So, would we like to proceed on to World War II?
I just wanted to shine a bit of light on what Avinash was talking about before. So we had the case of Veer Chandra Singh Gawari, who, as he mentioned, on April 23rd, 23rd of April 1930, he was heading a platoon of the Royal Gawar Rifles in Peshawar. And during a public gathering of people, which was unlawful according to the laws at the time, he was meant to fire upon the civilians, and he blatantly refused the order. And a historian describes the act as this act of Veer Chandra Singh Gawari was one of a kind. And it should still be remembered. Otherwise, hundreds of unarmed Pathans would have been massacred by the British forces. So, without this man stepping in to stop this, the most likely outcome of these events would have been that the soldiers present at the time would have just started firing upon the civilians, and thousands would have been killed. Or thousands, hundreds. I'm pretty sure the gathering was numbering up in the hundreds. So it kind of shows the parallels between the occupiers who their only objective was to keep control of India. There was no real objective of kind of cooperating with the people there, because it was they didn't really although some British people did care about the Indian people, the empire cared more about the money and the manpower and the political influence that they gained from owning such a big piece of land. So killing a couple of hundred people to keep control of a region was a small price to pay, but obviously the people of India saw that they were firing upon their own compatriots, and they looked at what they were serving. They were serving a cause which wasn't really helping their country, and realized that they shouldn't really they shouldn't really follow this kind of doctrine. And as I'm gonna butcher the name again, V. Chandra Singh Gawali did. It was kind of one of the first shows of opposition against the British control of India. We can move on to World War II now, because unless anyone else wants to say something in chat and provide any input, I think that would be that's probably it until World War II.
I think Avinash had a few more comments to add on Facebook. Again, probably going to butcher this name. Baishakhi Day, 13th of April 1919, the massacre took place. General Odier was later killed by Sardar Udham Singh. Again, sorry for the bad pronunciation, really bad.
Udham Singh had actually been injured in the massacre in Amritsar all those years earlier. In 1940, he finally got a chance to kill one of the men responsible for killing 380 Indians. I won't say recklessly, no, violently, literally in a walled city. Which, actually, against what the British wanted to do, these actions of mass violence against a crowd of defenseless civilians, they helped gather support for people such as Gandhi, who would advertise, propagate non-violent protests. Because we're not going to be like the animals that these British are. We'll just stand here and show our displeasure without actually pointing a rifle at someone. So acts such as these were used by people such as Gandhi to advocate their cause as better people than these monsters. He killed him in London later. From what I understand, he was killed in 1940, actually. I'm unsure of the circumstances.
Yeah, the Facebook comment confirms that.
Yeah, I see Avinash, yeah. Yes, Oscar, that's correct. Yeah. We could go into World War II. Or, oh, wow. They preserved the bullets. Thank you, Avinash. I did not know that. Oh, so he was presumably shot.
That's a very sadistic kind of way of preserving history. But yeah, I think we should move on to topic of World War II, because India, although they did play a big part in World War One, played a much bigger part of the British forces in World War Two. If Oscar, you'd like to start it off and tell us what you know about it.
Well, Britain isn't geographically a very big place. It only managed to play a big part in things such as World War I and World War II because of its colonies. It's a very small island which managed to develop technology to overcome its small amount of manpower and take over large amounts of land with massive amounts of people. So when World War II came around, with Germany, which had been stockpiling weapons, soldiers, arming itself, and all the other Axis powers which would come in, but I'm just going to say Germany as a broad term, England was outmanned terribly, so they had to call in their colonies. But this time, they didn't have the brute strength to force things such as India, New Zealand, maybe New Zealand, Australia, maybe, but India, no. They had to ask, not nicely, but they had to ask for people to sign on to be sent to this war. So they weren't just put in a ship and sent to Europe. They had to actually sign on to fight for the crown. Yeah, for the crown. and go into Europe. And they did so in incredible numbers. Without India, Britain would have suffered way more, if not have been lost, just because the raw amount of men being sent through to fight in Europe in the theatre, and I don't think they're praised enough for it. I'm gonna quickly Google just the raw amount of people. How
It's
many?
probably in the millions. I'd have to guess
Oh,
about 2 to 3 million, but I'm not exactly sure. So I think you should Google it just in case, so we could get an exact number.
2.4 million.
Can I share a photo here of Jawali Bag memoir shared on Red Fort by Indian government? Is it possible to put a link in chat to maybe a news article for that? I could bring it up on stream if you give us a link to like the original source.
The Jawaharlal memoirs. I have no idea what that is. I'm sorry. To say.
I'm guessing that is part of the. That is Avinash was saying before that I totally recall the incident, the incidents written in the Red Fort about the things that people suffered during the day in 1919, referring to presumably the massacre.
Yeah, most probably.
So yeah, if you'd like to provide us a link or something along those lines, that so I could pull up an image on the stream. Oscar, if you, I'm guessing you're getting the exact number up of the Indian people that took part. As I said, I'm guessing that the numbers are numbering somewhere in the millions.
Yeah, I said 2.5 million men signed on. I won't say voluntarily, but I presume there was immense pressure from propaganda, such as even was in Britain, which we have all heard. Just the immense pressure of having to fight for Britain, because many people at the time in India, they didn't know an India before Britain. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They were treating it as kind of their own. I would say, of course, there was immense pressure to get Britain out, but many people had grown up with this propaganda, with this pressure, with the soldiers, with the red. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, still, the number of 2.5 million is incredible, considering it's more than double of the people who were actually forced to fight in World War One. India was also a massive source of income for Britain, and Britain had to borrow billions of pounds to even fund their war effort. So once the war ended, they not only owed India men, we could say, I'm saying hypothetically, but also their bank. People often discuss America for borrowing money, ships, weapons to Europe to fight the Axis, but India was so incredible in that. They had an immense economy because the British had, of course, set them up to be as such, to be an economic powerhouse, which they are developing into now, which we all know. But back then, Britain had to borrow money in order to stay afloat. And presumably this money went around to even keep the people fed. So,
To have a little segue on that topic, to respond to Avinash on Facebook, if you find a way to send it to us, I'll pull it up on the stream. I'm not sure how you would do that though. But if you do find a way, let me know and I'll pull it up on the stream to have a little personal insight on the event. But Oscar, if you'd like to continue.
an email, would that work for you?
Yeah, you could always email it at historyofyesterday@gmail.com and I could pull it up.
Mm-hmm.
Were you finished about World War II? Or
I was slowly finishing.
yeah, I just want to kind of tie it up a little bit and say that obviously the Allies required a lot of manpower to push back Germany, who was fighting tooth and nail to keep control of the continent, especially in the late stages of the war where they were retreating. They were fighting with such they were very desperate in their fighting, and it caused a lot of casualties on both sides as as the Allies wanted to finish the war as soon as possible, of course, because they've been fighting for so long already and just wanted to go back home. But it also this obviously led to many casualties, as I said before, and the people of India made up quite a fair demographic of the total casualties of the war, especially if we just look at the casualties that came about from the British Empire. I don't have the exact statistics, but I could probably hazard a guess that it would be a very high percentage of the total British casualties would just purely be British Indian soldiers as part of the British Army. As we said before, this is probably an even bigger injustice than the injustice of World War One, because it's in the case of World War Two, the West is given much more credit than it, in my opinion, than it deserves, because many Westerners point towards, especially Americans point towards India being the key to Hitler being destroyed and the Third Reich being destroyed. And many British people point towards their control of the colonies and their supply of troops into the mainland Europe and being the last bastion of Europe as the key to winning World War II. But we often overlook such sacrifices that other people outside of the continent. So there was a lot of fighting within Afghanistan for control of petrol and oil that the British were holding, and that was vital towards Hitler's war effort, as Hitler was slowly being choked out in terms of resources because he didn't have oil to fuel his Blitzkrieg doctrine. And the people of Afghanistan both fought and fell victim to a war which wasn't really theirs, because it was being fought over holdings thousands of kilometers away. Again, the people of India, they suffered greatly, as they were, if you were part of the armed forces, you would have to go over and fight for, again, a country and land that you probably, unless you went there on holiday, you would probably never see in your life, especially for some of the people who signed up for the Indian Army. These were on the poorer side of the social class there, and they were transformed and drilled into these very good soldiers. But this didn't mean that let me just regather my thoughts. So, although the British did train them and gave them all of these resources, they didn't really have the right to take them away. And in the way that some people see it as, we industrialized India, therefore the Indian continent owes us. So we train these soldiers, therefore these soldiers are ours. It doesn't really work like that, because you would, like, in my opinion, you'd have to see it the other way around, because India fed the aristocrats of Britain for hundreds of years, giving them spices, and the middle class as well, giving them spices, cloth, and all of these. So I would actually flip it and be like, it's Britain that owes India for all of the sacrifices that they made during the world wars, all of the sacrifices that their people made to supply Britain with all of these luxuries that skyrocketed their development into one of the greatest world powers at the time. Before I go off on a tangent, I'll just check up on the comments. So we have a comment from Sana Control on Twitch saying, World War II was the result of World War One. True. Germany had accepted the worst conditions, and administration couldn't help the situation to their people. The worst devaluation means Hitler's rising. We cannot argue that World War One led to World War Two. That is a clear distinction that most historians make. So of course it's interconnected, as we have said before, and we have some more comments on Facebook.
Before you get to the comments on Facebook, I sent you 2 images. I think it was the ones that Avinash was talking about.
I'll pull these up on stream now. Hopefully...
Avinash, please do confirm if those are the images you are talking about. That is the location you are talking about.
While I do this, if you'd like to address Avinash's comments on Facebook.
Sure. So, Hitler was adamant, and as Nostradamus said, he ruled by his tongue. Well, I would say yes and no. The reason for this is not that obviously I'm not siding with him or anything, but he was Hitler. He was a man who actually did fight in World War One, so he actually knew war. He knew what he was talking about in that kind of a perspective. So you can't say he was just old talk and really didn't actually know what was going on into the battlefield. I guess you're saying that more in his way of fascist regime and the way he was controlling things. Hitler also said once after seeing a hockey match of that if I have this army, I can rule the whole world. I'm not sure on that, actually.
Yeah.
I'll bring up the pictures while we go on this topic. These are the pictures that Andre provided me. I'm guessing this is the location you were talking about.
Like I said, please, Avinash, do confirm, but I think this is the location and that he was talking about.
It might be a little bit blurry because the download quality kind of blurred out the images, but
And I have another comment here from Avinash saying, also said this is a request that can you have a session on Nostradamus and his prophecy? It was a good session on Indian history today. We can do something like that. Again, it's something that we're not extremely comfortable with. It's a bit more ancient history, but we can definitely look into it.
I'd say it's a very interesting topic because it Nostradamus kind of links into a lot of many people say that.
He just he just confirmed that is the location.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we've been talking about everything that we've been talking about for a while, so I'm going to move on to the outro because I think we've explored everything.
I guess we can go a bit more on World War II. Let's wait and see.
World War II. Sure, we can do a quick independence because we haven't really talked about the independence.
Also wanted to mention before we start talking about that, because many people don't know that Gandhi actually sent a letter to Hitler during World War II to actually ask him for his reasoning for the Holocaust and if he could stop.
Oh yeah. I was unaware of this.
So obviously Hitler was not a man that would just listen to those kind of suggestions. And
from what I've heard historians say that Hitler did read the letter, never responded to the letter, but you can imagine that he wouldn't really care about this.
In terms of, I just want to wrap up the whole topic with the independence. So I actually wrote an article about the independence of India. I think it was last year on the day of their independence, and if I do my maths right quickly, I think it was their 50. God, it was like their 75th anniversary. I think the 75th anniversary of their independence, if I remember correctly. And obviously, as we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, and as Avinash has correctly said and mentioned, the day of Indian independence, 15th of August 1947, was perhaps one of the most impactful events of our century because on that day, one of the world's biggest independence movement succeeded. At no time in current modern history have that many people become free on one single day. At the time, on the 15th of August 1947, the population of India was around 330 million, if I remember correctly from the article that I wrote last year. So on one day, 330 million people became independent and started to self-govern themselves. And found a new path away from being kind of controlled by this overseas island, which didn't really have any business controlling so many people, considering their position in the world at the time.
How many people were there in the Soviet Union, which was many years on, and it fell, that were essentially freed from? I want to say freed.
I think that might be bigger, but at the same time, most of the countries under communist control didn't fall at the same time. They fell.
Yeah, so it's like
time dates. So
I'm talking about like a singular central day.
if they were to fall on the same day, they'll probably be a lot more than the population of India at the time.
I think
Yeah.
population was of Russia or was around 250 million, and then if you combine all of the other states part of the USSR, you would probably reach 350 million, I'm sure.
Oh,
So
Yeah.
obviously, I'm just throwing around numbers. I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to do a bit more research on it. But in terms of modern history, and I think just overall history, in terms of one singular day, that is the biggest, like the most significant, freedom movement and the most significant amount of people freed up in one singular day. Obviously, a lot of conflict came about as a result of the independence, and still goes on today because such a big country with such a diverse culture and religion. Because obviously, India is part of India's home to a lot of different religions: Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, and so on. It's created a lot of divide within the country, and the only reason India is together today is because of the British Empire. So all of I don't really want to just blame all of India's problems on its history, because obviously some of their problems do come about from the way the government runs the country now, and a lot of other factors, such as having quite aggressive neighbors such as China. But India wouldn't be such a united country as it is today if it wasn't for England, because England, except for I think if you do try to make the argument that the Mughal Empire would have kept it together, I don't think the Mughal Empire would have stayed together for long enough to make India a unified state into the 20th century. But going back to what I was saying, without Britain creating this unified British Raj to hold as much land in the subcontinent as possible under their control, I don't think India would have been, one, as big and unified as it is today, and two, wouldn't have the same problems that it has today, because a lot of India's problems do stem from their diversity and lack of unity between all of these people who kind of just want different things. It's quite similar to countries such as China, who have a lot of many different minorities, and China has taken the approach of just kill them if they disagree with you. But obviously, India, being the world's biggest democracy, can't really do that. They have to work with the people, and it has done this quite successfully up until now. Obviously, with some hiccups.
Oh, they've done it successfully for the most part, except for the fact that Pakistan and Bangladesh exist.
Yeah.
Which was essentially them still disagreeing, even though they were a free nation at this point, still looking to religion to still partition themselves like they did many years prior. So, actually, West Pakistan and East Pakistan were created in 48, which was a year after, India actually got its independence. East Pakistan now being Bangladesh, and West Pakistan just being Pakistan. So we say is as powerful and strong together once they've sorted their own personal issues out, which the empire, which Britain of course didn't want to allow them to do back in when they still had power.
I think that's where we're probably going to end it, because we've been talking for an hour and a half and we've covered a lot of Indian history. Of course, we can't really cover everything, because India has, if we were to go back to sort of like a year such as the 1400s, we'd have different kingdoms such as the Kingdom of Punjab, Bharat, Mewar, and so on and so forth. All of these kingdoms have separate histories, and covering one of these kingdoms would probably take up an episode. So we've tried to cover as much as we can in one episode in terms of Indian history. I think we've, although we did skip a little bit from the consolidation of British rule on India to World War One. Overall, I think we've painted a picture that although India was a very important part of the British Empire, it really doesn't get the recognition that it deserves in a lot of historical media. If anyone has some last comments on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook. I don't know if YouTube worked today. As always, we are having problems with our rebroadcasting software. I think it started connecting in the end, but I'm not sure. But Andrei, if you'd like to address some of the comments that we're getting as we are closing in, I'm going to change the topic.
Right. So the last comments we're getting on Facebook from Avinash. Yes, modern history is almost covered, but never mentioned Sardar Bhagat Singh at all. I guess I think we did mention him, or Gandhi. And Gandhi, I mean, I don't know that much about it. I just thrown a little fact there. I mean, I don't know exactly what year he got his Nobel Peace Prize. I guess we can talk a bit about what he did and how.
I mean, I think we should cover. Gandhi is a really interesting figure that really deserves probably
a whole episode.
A whole episode. Yeah. So I think we should really wrap it up. So we have Silent Control says thanks for the stream. Yep, thank you for turning up. As always, we really enjoy talking about this. We hope to bring more guests in the future. If you'd like to maybe suggest somebody that we could bring on, or suggest a topic that we could maybe search one of our writers to talk about, always make sure to either suggest it on Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, or email us at historyofyesterday@gmail.com. We read all of the emails that we get, so we will make sure to think of a topic along the lines of the submissions that we get, as we did today with bringing Oscar on and using his expertise to delve into a topic that me and Andrei don't really know that much about. We will definitely explore Gandhi by himself in the future. I think it's we might bring you Oscar again on if you'd like to talk about. I know you know about him a little bit.
I've been using him as a 5-minute throwaway subject just for sake of covering him.
Yeah,
he was crucial and almost so crucial. He was a key player in actually getting India to the place where it is now. Yeah.
So as always, like I said, suggestions, leave them in the email. I hope you enjoy the stream. The next stream is probably going to be this Sunday, maybe, depending on. I have to move to university, so I'll see how my schedule goes. As always, we will update you on our Facebook if you'd like to follow us on facebook.com/History of Yesterday publication. We update you on everything to do with our publication and the stream. But with that said, I'm going to play the outro scene. Thank you guys for watching once again. Have a safe week, and we will see you on our next podcast. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.